Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip live in an odd and oppressive limbo. They have no nation, they have no citizenship, and they have no ultimate power over their own lives. In 1967, when Israel conquered these areas, the final 22% of the mandatory Palestine, Palestinians have been living under Israeli military occupation. While in some parts of Israel has allowed a Palestinian autonomous entity to take on such municipal functions as education, healthcare, infrastructure, and policing, Israel retains overall power. According to international law, an occupying force is responsible for the protection of the civilian population living under its control. Israel, however, ignores this requirement, routinely committing violations of the Geneva Conventions, a set of principles instituted after World War II to ensure that civilians would never again suffer as they did under the Nazi occupation. Israel is one of the leading violators of these conventions today. Israeli forces regularly confiscate private land, imprison individuals without process, including children, and physically abuse them under incarceration, demolish family homes, bulldoze orchards and crops, place entire towns under curfew, destroy shops and businesses, shoot, maim, and kill civilians, and Palestinians are without power to stop any of it. When a child is arrested, for example, often a group of armed soldiers in the middle of the night, parents can do nothing. Knowing that their son is most likely going to be beaten by soldiers on the way to the station, stripped and humiliated in prison, quite likely physically abused in multiple additional ways, and disdained to be held, perhaps in isolation for days, weeks, or months, parents are without the ability to protect their child. Quite often, in fact, they cannot even visit him. Finally, when the military trial under which their son is to be sentenced, often to years, sometimes decades in prison, all they can do is hire a lawyer, which efforts at best will reduce the ultimate sentence by a few months. Rarely, if ever, can even the most skilled lawyer do more than afford a child a friendly face in court and be an outside witness to the injustices of the proceedings. Meanwhile, the presence of such a lawyer provides Israel cover for its judicial system. Perhaps the most significant and rarely understood by people in the outside world is the fact that Palestinians live basically in prison, in which Israel holds the keys. They cannot leave Gaza or the West Bank unless Israeli guards allow them to. If they have been allowed to, they cannot return to their homes and families unless Israeli guards permit it. Frequently, in both cases, Israel refuses such permission. Academics invited to attend conferences abroad, high school students given U.S. Department scholarships to study in the United States, mothers wishing to visit daughters abroad, American citizens returning to their families, humanitarians bringing in wheelchairs, the list goes on, almost without limit. All have been denied permission by Israel to enter their own land. Living under such hardship and humiliation in the year 2000, the Palestinian population began an uprising against Israeli rule called Intifada. This term, rarely translated in the American media, is simply the Arabic word for uprising or rebellion. Literally, it means shaking off. The American Revolutionary War, for example, would be called the American Intifada against Britain. This is the second such uprising. The first began in 1986 and ended in 1993 when peace negotiations offered hopes of justice. Sadly, in the following years, these hopes were crushed after Israel, rather than withdrawing from the West Bank and Gaza, as promised, actually doubled its expansion in these areas. During the first uprising, which consisted largely of Palestinians throwing stones at Israeli troops, very few Palestinians had weapons. Palestinians were killed at a rate approximately 7 to 10 times that of Israelis. One of the ways Israeli forces attempted to put down this rebellion was through the break of bones. break the bones policy implemented, in which people had been throwing stones, often youths, were held down and their arms broken. On the first day of this policy alone, one hospital in Gaza treated 200 people for fractures. Today's uprising, termed the Second Intifada, was sparked when an Israeli general, known for his slaughter of Palestinian civilians throughout his career, visited a Jerusalem holy site accompanied by over 1,000 armed Israeli soldiers. When some Palestinian youths threw stones, Israeli soldiers responded with live gunfire, killing 5 the first day and 10 the second. The uprising has now continued for over 5 years, as Israel periodically mounts massive invasions into Palestinian communities using tanks, helicopters, gunships, and F-16 fighter jets. Palestinian fighters resisting these forces possess rifles and homemade mortars and rockets. A minute fraction strap explosives onto their own bodies and attempt to deliver their bombs in person. Often they kill only themselves. While the large majority of Palestinians oppose suicide bombings, many feel that armed resistance has become necessary, much as Americans supported war after the attack of Pearl Harbor. Nevertheless, only a small portion take an active part in the resistance, despite the fact that virtually all supports its aim to create a nation free from foreign oppression. Most Palestinians attempt, with greater or lesser success, to go on with their lives, raise their children, attend school, go to work, celebrate festivities, organize weddings, raise their crops, provide for their families, and all these things that preoccupy people around the world. As Israel constructs a wall around them, however, prevents them at checkpoints from traveling from town to town, destroys their crops, prevents children from traveling to schools, and the sick and injured from getting to hospitals, it is becoming increasingly difficult to live even in approximation of a normal life. Most Palestinians feel that Israeli government's intention is to drive them off the land, and there is a great deal of evidence that this is the goal of many Israeli leaders. At the same time, however, there is a small but determined minority of Israelis, joined by citizens from throughout the world, who are coming to the Palestinian territories to oppose Israeli occupation. These internationals, as they're often called, take part in peaceful marches, attempt to help Palestinian farmers harvest their crops despite Israeli military closures, live in refugee camps in hope that their presence will prevent Israeli invasions and shellings, and walk children to school. They are sometimes beaten, shot, and killed. Some Israeli soldiers are refusing to serve in the West Bank and Gaza, stating, "We shall not continue to fight beyond the 1967 borders in order to dominate, expel, starve, and humiliate an entire people." So, for those of you who don't know what's going on, it's just a tiny synopsis. I'm going to leave some links over in the sidebar. There are lots of videos that you can watch on it. I would strongly suggest you educate yourselves and not believe everything you read, especially here in America, from the mainstream media. There is a whole truth out there. What is happening over there right now? It is a crime against all humanity, and it is going to take all of us banding together, rising up together to get it to stop. My thoughts and my blessings and my well wishes are with the people in Palestine, those suffering, and there really are no words. So, peace out, YouTube.